Welcome back to Here with Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about the subject of was Pauly-E actually wrong? This would be Paul R. Ehrlich, author of The Population Bomb, a rather sensationalist tract that came out in the late 1960s, early 1970s, sold like hotcakes, and he was predicting that unless serious action was taken to limit human population growth, you would have these mass extinction events, wars, diseases, 10 million children dying of starvation every year in the 1970s. Now, clearly, his claims didn't pan out exactly as he had put them to paper, and more recently he was on 60 Minutes, so a lot of folks on the Twitter and the YouTube were like, oh, what a sick burn, you're wrong. These are dime-wits and quarter-wits, the types who, they don't understand the interdependency of systems. They certainly are never going to stop and consider the consequences of being right or someone being wrong, because it doesn't fascinate them. They just want to go about living their meaningless lives. So in this video, I wanted to break down, was he actually off the mark? And if he was, what's the price we're paying for that? So I should note, people took him seriously. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, they were exporting this through grants, promoting, birth control. Establishment conservatives such as McNamara, Kissinger, H.W. Bush, they all believed this was actually imperative because the argument was you had all this population growth in Asia in particular, and the worry was large populations will go to communism. We got to do something about it. Correct. Well, when we took over Japan after World War II, we forced them to pass very liberal abortion laws to get rid of the disabled, the mentally ill, those who have some kind of ailments, and it was successful. It reduced their population, their economy took off. Whether we can attribute that to the current low birth rate, hard to say. I think that has more to do with the economic system they've brought on board. They're just so wealthy. They don't have much to aspire to, at least the average individual in that society. It's just make a bunch of money. It's all consumerism for the most part, unless you're into the old samurai culture. You saw a similar push in China, of course. Korea is an interesting story. Even though abortion was strictly against the law in Korea, it was widespread and encouraged by right-wing military dictatorships. So they didn't really move away from that until the late 90s, and just recently they've kind of evened out gender-wise. India is another question. Under the state of emergency with Indira Gandhi, there was an aggressive attempt to go around not just doing abortions, but also sterilizing a lot of poorer men. Millions were in fact sterilized. It was relatively successful in the sense that, yes, for a time it did bring down the population. Unfortunately, whether it was personal or cultural preferences for boys, there were a lot of sex-selective abortions going on. And so that leads us to a situation where more recently there's been a projection or an estimation that Asia collectively is missing over 160 million women because of these policies. And it is causing problems. In Vietnam, they say by 40, if not sooner, you're going to have 4 million men that are in surplus. And what this leads to is what you see from the Roosh guys, like, oh, I go on ChristianFilipina.com, or the incel bros. Not to hate on these people, but you should definitely read this book because it shows you a lot of these Asian men are going to poor Asian countries to get women because there are just not enough of them. And when you think about that, and guys that talk all about the traditionalism and they want traditional femininity, and they don't realize all the economic dynamics, the neoliberal exploitation, these traditional cultures that have been built on decades of basically, postmodern liberal social engineering. And they're not aware of that. They think they're just traditional because of Confucianism and trad values. It's like, you best believe there's a lot of religious women that have had abortions, that have taken those measures because they couldn't afford a child because they're so poor. You best believe that's been going on. Even if you look at the so-called Orthodox Christian countries in Eastern Europe, some of the former Muslim, like Albania, ridiculously high abortion rates, sex selective, sterilizations. I mean, this is stuff you have to pay attention. Even Armenia, which is historically a very Christian country, has very high abortion rates and not a very impressive birth rate. So I encourage you to read it. because it's going to give you more of a sense of being rational if you go over there. Not to say you can't do it, but just take away the ego, because that's going to get you into trouble. I also will be going back and putting some citations from this book, because I was speculating in the Black Pill book that if you have excess male population, it can lead to war. They actually confirm this with the formation of the Portuguese colonial empire and also the Taiping Rebellion. So very interesting. It's not an easy read. It'll take you a bit of time. It's dense, but it's, I think, a good use of your resources, or whatever, your life, if you will, just for a few days, a few weeks, depending on how quickly you go through a text. So what does this all lead to? Well, I've noticed a very bizarre trend. People have said for decades that Care Bears are trying to subvert the West, and with good reason. But it appears that many curry cells are now jumping on the same bandwagon. I don't know if it's a combination of them having reasonably high intelligence, but not being able to blend in as easily as the Care Bears, especially if they're darker tones. They've got the I'm brown, racism mentality. Mind you, I don't see this so much from Brahmins or Sikhs, with the exception of Jagmeet Singh. That might have something to do with, where you belong in the old world caste structure. It appears that they're lower caste people. They come to the West, they make decent money, and then instead of being grateful, their next move is we have to destroy this country, or at least remake it in our own image. So this dude's book, which is lauded by all the globalists, his argument is that every historically white country, including the Slavic ones, Russia, and then of course Japan, need to honorary there, need to open the floodgates and bring in tens of millions of predominantly male Middle Eastern, Sub-Saharan African, Chinese, and of course Indian migrants to help the neoliberal economy, brah. He actually has a line where he goes, I kid you not, Canada has already passed the point of no return to becoming a mongrelized nation. Like, who says that in the current year? And he also claims that, like with Germany, no one can say what German is, the identity. It's always decided on by the new culture. So all these Turks and Nigerians can decide what Germany is. That's fantastic. It shows you need to pay attention to what's going on, because if you have all these surplus of males and they're going to move, that's going to be a problem from an identity standpoint. There is an agenda to depopulate countries of their heritage stock. We all know this. But let's lay that aside. Let's take away the politics, let's take that out. Let's deal with quality of life and the environment, because supposedly this is why, Ehrlich's wrong, because all this great technology made it a non-factor. Okay, let's say that that's actually true. Well, what happens when you bring tons of people into a country? Well, you need space. You have to develop, right? So that means more subdivisions. Since I've been a kid just driving around places that I grew up, it used to be trees, now it's subdivisions, it's a strip mall, it's data centers, it's office buildings. And this is considered to be good for what reason? Oh, it helps the economy, brah. Yeah, so you can have these people that work in the tech industry, and many of them, if you look at these videos, they don't do any work. It's literally just they're subsidized to do nothing. They serve no purpose. But that's what we have to bring in all these folks to do. And I know there's some that legitimately do the grind, but much of it is really just made up, okay? So you got that, and then you've got, more hospitals, roads, schools, that sort of thing. You've got the fact that, well, we can just use green energy, put people in electric cars. Yeah, and then everyone's charging their electric car overnight. What do you think is going to happen to the grid? Are you going to power it with magnifying glasses and propeller hats? No, because that stuff, while it can work with a smaller population, it's not reliable on a large consumerist scale. You've already seen this with Texas, you saw it in California. It can't keep up. So that means the electricity is still going to probably come from clean coal, LOL, or nuclear. Now, not to say that those are all bad, but they are pollutants in their own way, and they keep us on this track of we have to keep growing. That's all. The only thing that matters. Jeb Bush, I'll get us to 4% GDP growth. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to campaign on, essentially. But yeah, you take all that stuff that people don't think of as much. Municipal water plants. Many of them are operating well beyond their capacity because they take time to expand. They're very expensive. I saw a figure for one was just a municipality, maybe 50, 60,000 people, not counting the ones that go and work there every day. It was like $60,000 a month in electric bills. It's probably double by now. Where do you think that's coming from? Wind and solar? No. It's probably coming from it's probably going to come from coal-fired electric, or it's going to come from nuclear. And again, they're not all bad, but they keep us on this endless march towards development. And you forget about quality of life. I would like to be surrounded by trees. They just destroyed the view at my house to put up a bunch of ugly ass mass market houses, right? So, and then not just that, but you're forced to live with people you have nothing in common with except these vague consumerist items and civic nationalism, which means nothing because no one actually agrees what this country is anymore, or at least less and less. Reverting back to Pauly-E, he was wrong largely because of a couple of factors: expansion of public health, antibiotics through foreign aid, and then, of course, the Green Revolution, which was this large-scale attempt also by international organizations which were afraid of communism. So they said, if the capitalist provides you with food, you won't be commie. So they destroy the traditional farming methods, which are more reliant on renewing the soil, appreciation of seeds. The one claims that in the last 100 years, we've lost like 94% of genetic variety diversity with seeds because they've been replaced by GMOs. And if you have, supposedly, if you have GMOs growing next to even organic crops, they start cross-pollinating, so you don't really have organic crops anymore. I definitely want to do more research into that. Another really good book is The War on Bugs. This is all about protecting yourself, folks. I don't care who you are, I don't care where you come from. It's for your own interests. Now, in the past, a farmer might have had a bunch of kids because he needed cheap labor, but many of them would not have survived because you have more primitive medical supplies and nutrition, whatever it might be. In fact, I know someone that were just overseas in South Asia. They talked about a family member. She had had 6 or 7 miscarriages before having a child. So that can be a real factor. That's not as common in the Western world. But yeah, you bring in all the fertilizers, the pesticides, which ends up in your food, and you can have more guarantees of harvests, at least for a time, because then the insects start adapting to the pesticides and whatnot. You have refrigeration, you have preservatives. So yes, you can support a larger population, but that's at what cost? Everything's polluted. You lose traditional farming techniques, which leads to typically healthier food anyway. You destroy the soil through over-farming, and then in other parts of the world, we have the identity problem. We have the just keep growing and destroying the world. These are significant questions. Going green energy, one of the arguments for why they took out Evo Morales is because they needed more lithium, and there's a lot of it in Bolivia. How are they going to do all these batteries? So, yes, was Paul Ehrlich, he was a sensationalist. Yes, he was kind of a sky is falling, but he was only wrong at a tremendous cost. And even the so-called innovations that fix things also come at a massive cost. So you have to weigh that, is what I would be saying. I encourage all of you to pay attention to that. Don't be the dimewit who says, oh, you're just wrong. And think about, well, what does it mean to be right? How does that factor into everyday life? And what does that mean for the future of nation states, for people, for cultures, and just our ability to live healthy? Because the food we're eating is not healthy by and large. You're like, oh, GMOs are safe. Who's funding it is saying GMOs are safe? Actually, I recently talked with a nutritionist about seed oils. And she's like, oh, yeah, no, it's all conspiracy theory. They're totally healthy. American Heart Association says that. Right, who funds them? But then she says, but I won't touch them. So she was trying to tell me without telling me. She said, especially how you cook them is an issue. But my point is just that, educate yourself. Okay, just because something doesn't play out doesn't mean we aren't essentially kicking the can down the road to where it could actually be worse. So let me know what you think about this whole subject and add in anything you might have. And if you want to check out any of the books listed, I'll put them below with links.